They tied my hands with rope that smelled like last winter's smoke and stale fear. 3 knots sailor tight. The pyre creaked under my weight. Fresh wood, green at the heart, hungry to learn what burning feels like. Dawn was still a bruise on the horizon, a thin line of ash blue where the hills cupped the sky. People gathered in a ring, faces lost to hoods and steam of their breaths, waiting to watch a girl turn into a lesson. "Witch," someone hissed. It brushed my cheek like a cold fly. Another voice, "Omega, useless." The words stuck to me and didn't sink. Wolves don't care what you name them when your throat is open. I tried to breathe in counts of 4 like I used to at the river. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold, anything to keep the shaking quiet. My mother had called it borrowing the river's pulse. She'd gone into that river with stones in her pockets the year the council stopped listening to anyone who was not wearing a ring of iron. A priest lifted a torch. Its flame curled back against the wind, then leaned forward with an eager hiss, as if it could smell me. The council stood behind him, 12 robed statues with eyes like the underside of knives. Chancellor Maroth's mouth twitched the way a trap twitches when the bait is touched. "At sunrise," he said, "the fire will cleanse Ashmore of its stain." The beta, Roran, didn't look at me as he set the last stake. He kept his jaw locked the way men do when they're turning their faces into shields. "Orders," he'd said when he dragged me from my cell. I believed him. I'd seen the bruises the council's words left on his honor. Wind came from the east, the kind that tastes of iron. I told myself it was only the forge smoke from the lower quarter. Not a warning, not the gods licking their teeth. "Any final words?" the priest asked. His voice slithered around the ring and coiled at my feet. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't break. That felt like theft. When the flames don't take me, run. They laughed because fear always dresses itself in humor before it chooses a weapon. Somewhere a child cried. Somewhere a wolf answered. So far away it might have been a memory. The first spark kissed the straw at my ankles. It should have taken all of me. It should have leapt, devoured, sung. Instead, it trembled, forked, then crawled back as if the air had teeth. The crowd leaned forward, a single animal. The priest frowned and lowered his torch again, pushing the ember into the straw. This time the flame caught, stammered, and began to eat in small, sullen bites. Heat climbed my calves. Smoke found my throat. I tasted winter pine and old resin and the scrape of panic. Then the world tilted. Once, like a table, a careless hand has bumped. Horns. Not the thin horns of a council summons. These were war horns, the kind that make bones remember where they belong. The ring broke into ripples. Soldiers looked toward the eastern road. The priest turned, torch rising. I didn't have to see to know. I felt it the way the ground feels the first hoofbeat. The Alpha King had come. Not with a parade, not with banners, with silence that dragged terror in its wake. Hooves struck frost-hard earth. Wolves padded between the horses, shoulders rolling like the sea. The front ranks parted, and he rode through the gap, Cale Draven, the man whose shadow had ruled us for a decade and whose absence had almost unmade the realm. I'd heard stories. The curse had been eating him from the inside, chewing his wolf away, leaving only a man who remembered what power felt like the way the body remembers a lost limb. Weak, they said, hollow, dying, they lied. He swung from the saddle without looking at anyone. No cloak, no crown, just black leather hardened by weather, and a face cut by years that had no interest in being forgiven. His eyes found the pyre, then me, then the lazy flame climbing with the arrogance of a drunk. Something changed in his gaze, the way metal changes when it realizes it can be a blade. "Who ordered this?" he asked, and the air ate the sound and gave it back twice as heavy. Chancellor Maroth stepped forward with a bow that bent only the part of him that wasn't spine. "Your Majesty, the council judged her a danger. Witchcraft. Incitement. The people needed fire," Cale finished, calm as snowfall. "They always need fire when their minds are cold." Roran looked from the king to me and back. The muscle in his cheek twitched. I felt heat climb to my knees. The ropes were beginning to char. I would smell like pork in another minute. I would scream. I promised myself I wouldn't, then forgave myself in advance for failing. Kyle walked into the ring. No one moved to stop him. Fear does not bow. It steps aside and hopes to be mistaken for stone. He passed the priest without looking, climbed the 2 steps to the pyre, and, without hesitation, stepped into the fire. For 1 heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the flame recognized him and drew in a sharp breath as if surprised to find its mouth full of iron. He did not look at me. He looked at the rope around my wrists. His hands were bare. He set them to the knot, and I felt the heat peel across his skin. The smell of burned leather hit my tongue before I understood it was his flesh. He did not flinch. He pulled once, twice. My bonds loosened. "Put your arms around my neck," he said. I did. The world narrowed to the circle of his breath, the rough line of his jaw, the steady thunder of his heart. He turned, put his back to the flame, and covered me with his body. Heat slammed us. It tried to crawl through him to reach me. It couldn't. It remembered a law older than the council. What the Alpha shelters belongs to the Alpha. "Stop this," Meroth snapped. "Majesty, you cannot—" "Roran," Kale said, still not looking away from me. "If another man speaks, take his tongue." The beta moved, and silence learned its lesson. Kale bent his head until his mouth was near my ear. "Breathe," he said, "with me. 4 in, hold, 4 out, I knew that count. My mother's river." I took the breaths he gave me and stacked them in my chest like small, cool stones. The ropes gave. He shoved them off. The stake behind me popped, the sap inside it hissing like a dying snake. He lifted me, 1 arm beneath my knees, 1 behind my back, and stepped down from the pyre with the sure feet of a man who has never decided to fall. "Water," he barked. Men ran. The crowd had become a mouth, open and stunned. I found Meroth's eyes through the steam. He watched me the way a hawk watches the sky for a thing it has decided must exist. The mistake. He would tear it out of the air and drag it before the people if the air would let him. It wouldn't. Not today. "Your Majesty," he tried again. The words dipped in oil. The law, Kyle said, is not a pyre built for men who fear their own shadows." He set me on the ground. My legs didn't remember how to be legs. Roran's cloak was suddenly around my shoulders. Grain of wool, weight of duty. The beta didn't meet my eyes. He looked at the king instead. And for a breath I saw a man who would set himself on fire if Kale asked. "I will answer for this in the hall," Kale told the council. "Not to your iron, but to the truth. Until then, she is under my protection." He turned to me then. Up close, his eyes were not the cold gold of the stories. They were dark, rimmed with a ring of thin amber light, like the edge of a storm when the sun is trying to decide whether to live. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ilara," I said. It felt like speaking into a well and hearing a stranger answer back from very far below. "Can you walk, Ilara?" "I don't know." It seemed safe to tell the truth. Everything else was tinder. He didn't smile. But something in his face shifted, an acknowledgement of the kind of courage that is not loud enough for a horn. "Walk beside me. If you fall, I'll make it look like part of the plan." We crossed the ring together, my bare feet snapping frost. The people parted like water around a ship. I saw faces I knew. Mara the baker with flour in the cracks of her hands, Den the smith with his forearms blackened by work and grief. None of them raised their voices. They watched and waited to see if the morning would decide to be a miracle or a mistake. Halfway to the horses, the ground bucked. Not an earthquake. Not wind. A ripple. As if the earth itself had taken a breath it meant to hold for a very long time. Kale halted. Roran's hand went to his sword. The wolves in the outer ring stopped with paws lifted, ears forward, heads tilted as if hearing a note humans can't. The dawn light thickened. Acquiring weight, the fire behind us flared, high enough to paint the undersides of the council's hoods. It should have been loud. It wasn't. Every sound was swallowed by that impossible hush. Ash lifted and drifted toward me. Not gray, not dead, silver. It swirled, slid across my skin, and didn't leave soot. It left a chill, then a whisper of warmth, like a small creature curling under my ribs. Kale felt it. I saw the moment he did, a stilling, a knot of awareness low in his stance. His head tilted, eyes narrowing. "What is that?" I began, and then the ash touched the inside of my wrist. Light, not a blaze. A line. a thin, clean thread of silver that raced from the heel of my hand. The silver line didn't burn. It wrote itself into me. One stroke, then another, like moonlight remembering an old path. I tried to pull my wrist away on instinct, but Cale's hand closed gently over mine, steady as a doorframe when a house is learning to sway. "Easy," he said. "Don't fight it." "I'm not," I whispered, and that was the truth. It wasn't heat crawling beneath my skin. It was recognition. The ash drifted around us in a slow, deliberate spiral, ignoring the wind, ignoring gravity, ignoring prayer. I felt the crowd leaning with their bodies in their fear. The council stood very still. When men who love power go quiet, it means the world has shown them a shape they... The wolves growled in one voice. Not loud. Final. Cale set his body between me and the council with the kind of motion that doesn't feel like a choice. "Bind no one," he said. "We'll ride for the citadel, now." Roran barked orders. Horses moved. The ring broke. The crowd folded itself into lanes. I should have felt small inside the river of bodies. Instead, the mark on my wrist throbbed once, steadying me the way a hand on the back of the neck steadies a panicked dog. I took one step, then another. My legs remembered me. We cleared the square. Frost cracked underhoof. The wolves paced along the flanks, eyes on the edges, reading danger from the weeds and stones. The dawn pushed a pale blade through the clouds. When we reached the eastern road, Cale swung into the saddle and turned to lift me up behind him. The burnt skin on his palms dragged against my forearms, a rasp of pain he didn't name. "You need a healer," I said. "I need answers," he said. "Hold." I wrapped my arms around his middle, and the world became leather and muscle, and the rhythm of a mount that trusted its rider. The city slid away. Pines rose. Their needles wore ice like secrets. When we passed the old gallows hill, a gust caught the ash I'd left behind on the pyre and dragged it into the road in a long, glittering ribbon. It tried to follow us and failed, falling back like a disappointed tide. "Why did you come?" My voice felt foreign against the fabric at his shoulder. "For you," he said. He meant it. The words didn't carry ceremony or politics or the careful weight of a lie built to be believed. They carried the simple architecture of truth. It made no sense. It made too much. I closed my eyes against wind and rising questions. The citadel reared out of the gray like a clenched fist. We climbed the last switchback between cliffs where crows nested and soldiers remembered they were mortal. Roran rode ahead to clear the gate with a shout. Iron groaned. We spilled into the inner courtyard. Servants froze mid-task. The smell of damp stone and horses and old smoke wrapped around us like an old cloak. Cale swung down and reached for me. I let him steady me to the ground and immediately saw the red in his palms, a wet shine like lacquer. He noticed my noticing and curled his fingers. "Fetch Ivan," he called, and a page who looked too young to know fear snapped into motion. "And bring water hot enough to argue." He led me through the great doors and up the worn steps to the solar. The high windows caught the day and turned it into polite light. Maps lay rolled on the long table. A black banner with the wolf sigil hung over the hearth like a stern guardian. He steered me to the fire and only then let his spine admit to gravity. "Sit," he said. I sat. Heat kissed the mud from my feet. The mark on my wrist gleamed in the firelight and then, subtly, dimmed, as if deciding to keep its own counsel. Kyle watched it with the careful stillness of a man who has learned that problems are more easily killed if you let them think you haven't seen them. "It formed when the ash touched you," he said. "Not before." "It chose me," I said, surprising myself. His mouth tugged, not quite amusement, not quite grief. "Everything chooses, even fire." The door opened. Ivan, the castle healer, arrived in a rush of herbs and apology. He set a bowl of steaming water on the table, pulled linen from his bag, and went to his knees before the king as if prayer required soap. "Majesty, your hands." He took one gently, hissed at the damage, and began to bathe it. "What did you touch?" "A mistake," Cale said. "And it touched you back," Ivan muttered. "As mistakes do." His gaze flicked to me. He drew in a breath the way scholars do when the thing in front of them has jumped from the myth into the room. "The mark," he whispered. "Moon ash." "Sir, speak," Cale said. "In the old books there's mention of ash that remembers the blood of vows," Ivan said. words tumbling over each other in their hurry. Not the vows made to men, to councils, but the vows the earth hears. The kind that can't be broken without the ground itself closing around the breaker. Witchcraft, Roran said from the doorway. He had come in quiet, a habit men grow who escort kings. Or worse. Older than witchcraft, Ivan said. Older than the wolves. Kyle's eyes never left my wrist. What does it do? Marks a bond, Ivan said. A claim. Mine? The room tilted. To whom? Ivan hesitated. Not whom, he said. What? The silence that followed had edges. Kale broke it with a single word. Explain. The pyre was meant to eat her, Ivan said, breath fogging in the cool air between sentences. It didn't. Something in her said no. The ash recognized it and answered. Moon ash does that when it finds a living vow. It writes the truth of it where the world can see. A living vow. Kale's voice thinned. To me. To the act, Ivan said carefully. You set your body between her and fire. The old laws like that kind of math. Roran made the sign men make when they don't want the sky to notice them. So the ash says the king belongs to the girl. He half smiled without warmth. Or the other way around. No, Ivan said. It says what was done cannot be undone without cost. Kale turned his burned hands toward the flames, face unreadable. There's always a cost. I should have been grateful. I was. Gratitude is a warm coat. It also hides the knife at your ribs for a better chance at finding the heart. What cost? I asked. Ivan looked at the king, then at me. If the ash has chosen a bond, it will defend it. Men who try to cut it will bleed in places they can't bandage. He swallowed. Sometimes the bond bleeds too. Plainly, Kale said. If you are torn from each other, Ivan said, you may both fail. The fire popped, spitting a small spark onto the hearth. It lived a short, bright life and died without ceremony. Roran shifted his weight. Somewhere a bell rang the hour and came up one note short. I watched the mark, and the mark watched me. You are not a witch, Kale said at last. A statement, not a kindness. No, I said. Just a convenient pyre. He huffed once. Agreement, maybe. Meroth will come at noon, with witnesses and a speech he practiced in his bath. Roran's mouth twitched into something like a smirk. He always does. Kale rose. Pain pulled at the corners of his composure, but it didn't win. We'll give him something to practice with. Majesty, Roran warned softly. He has the council at his back. Then we'll take away the ground under their feet. Kale looked at me. Can you stand before them? My legs know me again, I said. My fear doesn't. Good, he said. Let it. Men who aren't afraid are either gods or fools. Even bound the king's hands in clean linen and backed away. I'll gather what I can find on ash marks, he said. Most scrolls were burned when the old temple fell. Of course they were, Kyle murmured. Anything useful is either lost or illegal. He dismissed Ivan with a nod, then crossed to the window and looked down into the courtyard. Snow began to fall, the kind that starts as a promise and becomes a problem. The wolves below tilted their faces up and let it salt their fur. Why me? I asked before I could decide not to. Kale didn't turn. Because the world hates easy choices. That's not an answer. It's the only one that doesn't lie. We met Meroth in the Great Hall at noon. He had assembled a small audience, nobles with their collars stiff enough to serve as armor, merchants who liked to smell coin on the air before they inhaled, priests with mouths that practiced the shapes of judgment. The pyre smoke still clung to the king's hair like defiance. Meroth bowed the way a man bows to inform the room he has bowed. Majesty, he said, we celebrate your timely appearance at this morning's correction. We regret its interruption. Correction, Kale said. A new word for murder. Law. Meroth corrected, tone silk over stone. His gaze flicked to my wrist and lingered, a black fly choosing a wound. And the law is older than sentiment. Older than you, Kale agreed mildly, and the room smiled into its sleeves. Meroth's eyes thinned. The girl wears a mark, one I do not recognize. For the safety of Ashmore, I request she be remanded to council custody for examination by the temple. No, Kyle said. A ripple, small but eager, moved through the watching bodies. Meroth spread his hands. Majesty, the people will see their king stand between them and folly, Kale said. As he did this morning, Meroth's jaw flexed. Then the people will see their king break the law. Kale descended one step from the dais. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The law is a lever. Men like you love levers because they move what your hands can't. But levers break. Men break on them. I prefer doors. Doors, Meroth sneered. And what door does a mark of witch ash open? Kale pivoted and reached for my hand. The hall leaned forward in one collective, greedy motion. He lifted my wrist where all could see. The silver loop caught the high window light and returned it. Brighter, as if it had borrowed something from the sky and decided to keep it. A door like this, he said, a vow made in the open. A truth you can't unsay. Meroth laughed once, brittle, a circus trick. Walk through it, Kyle said. If it's only smoke, Meroth hesitated. Then pride, which has never learned to count, made him step forward. He reached out and, slowly, as if his hand belonged to a stranger, touched the mark with the tip of his finger. The hall gasped. Meroth jerked back as if a snake had whispered his name. His face blanched. His mouth gaped without sound. A thin line of blood welled from the pad of his finger, bright as a fresh idea. Roran's hand found his sword and left it there. The priest made the low sounds men make when they can't decide whether to pray or run. I held my breath and tried very hard not to love the pain in Meroth's eyes. The law, Kale said gently, has opinions. Meroth hid his bleeding finger in his sleeve. Witchcraft, he spat, losing polish. I demand a horn cut him off, not the gate horn, not the city horn. A high, banshee-thin call from the watch on the eastern ridge. Twice. Then a third time. The pattern that means danger that belongs to no army and no weather. Roran went pale in the way trained men go pale. All at once, as if the blood has been given orders. Rogues, he said. Now? Kale asked, incredulous and pleased. Good, Meroth blinked. You cannot be glad. I can when trouble knocks while I'm already awake. Kale looked at me, at the mark, at the door it had made. You wanted answers, he said softly. Come earn them. He turned, cloak snapping, and the hall, council, priests, merchants, wolves, rushed into motion like a heart remembering its job. I stood in the sudden wind of purpose, pulse racing against silver. Outside the snow thickened. On the far ridge, something moved where trees become rumor. Roran pressed a dagger into my palm, hilt first, eyes steady. Stay at his back, he said, or we'll lose more than a king. The mark throbbed once, agreement or hunger. I didn't know which. We ran for the gate as the horn called again, longer this time, the sound of a throat torn open to make room for a warning. Over the battlements I saw them, shapes slipping between the pines, low and dark and many. Not a pack, a tide. The silver at my wrist warmed, then cooled, then warmed again. Don't fight it, Kale said, drawing steel. I'm not, I said, and felt the first curl of heat rise in my chest like a breath I hadn't taken yet. The rogues broke from the tree line at a run. The mark answered. Snow tore sideways as if the sky had decided to unmake itself. The rogues came low and fast, fur slick with frost, eyes like hot nails hammered into the white. Archers loosed. The first line of wolves folded mid-stride and slid, painting the ice with streaks of rust. It didn't slow the rest. Nothing slows hunger that has learned its own name. Kale's sword cleared its scabbard with a sound that lives in men's bones. Hold the line, he roared, and the gatehouse answered with iron, chains grinding, portcullis teeth lowering until they kissed the stone. The mark on my wrist brightened, then cooled, then flared, as if it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be moon or fire. Heat rose in my throat, clean and thin, the way a flute note rises when someone who knows what they're doing finds the hole with their breath. Stay with me, Roran said, and fell into motion. Gestures that moved men like pieces on a board, words that turned panic into purpose. Soldiers formed ranks too deep just inside the gate, shields up, spears set, faces tight. Behind them, the castle wolves took their places with the ease of muscle memory. Shoulders touching, mouths open, steam lifting from their breath. The first wave hit the lowered portcullis like an idea that refuses to learn manners. Iron rang. The wolves scrabbled, jaws flashing between the bars, teeth on steel, teeth on flesh, then teeth on nothing as archers turned the world directly beyond the gate into a porcupine's bad day. Blood steamed. Snow drank it. Not a pack, Roran muttered. A herd of knives. I felt the pressure building, not in the hall, not in the yard, inside me. The mark throbbed in a pattern that my pulse tried to imitate and failed, stumbling, then catching up, then stumbling again. Each throb carried a picture. Burned wood. A hand. A back bent between flame and something it wanted more than pain. The memory wasn't mine, and it was. It hurt at the edges. It steadied in the middle. Kel glanced sideways at me once. Not the look men give liabilities. The one they give weapons they haven't tested yet. If it comes, he said over the scream of steel, don't choke it. What if I burn us? The question slipped out before fear could file the edges off it. Then do it on purpose. A rogue found a weak seam in our kill zone and forced its head and one shoulder through the bars. It locked eyes with me, amber and wrong and desperate, and drove forward with a growl that had swallowed its own name. Roran moved to intercept, quick and sure. His spear found meat and slid deep, but the animal kept coming, chewing the shaft, chewing everything. The heat inside me snapped a tether. It didn't explode. It unfolded. A slow, low bloom from sternum to skin, warmth that didn't ask permission. The air around my hand thickened, then lightened, then gently caught fire. No flame licked. No roar came. A clear shimmer, like summer being remembered in winter, pushed outward in a wide, low arc through the gate. Where it touched the rogue, hunger loosened like a jaw unclenching. The wolf sagged against the bar, shaking its head as if someone had whispered a word it had been trying not to hear. Its breath left it in a long, shameless sigh. It backed out. Others behind it stumbled as the wave brushed them, then blinked like drunks handed water. The whole front edge of the tide softened, confused, suddenly aware of bodies and bone and the fact that teeth live in mouths that can decide to close. It's not killing them, Roran said, voice half awe, half horror. It's unsnarling them. Again, Kale said to me, quiet and urgent. The way you breathe. I pulled, but the warmth fought me. No, not fought. Refused to be dragged. It wanted to be invited. I remembered the pyre. The count. 4 in, hold, 4 out. The mark beat under my skin, in time with the old river my mother loved and the new river I had become. I opened my palm and opened something else I don't own a word for. The second wave went farther. It rolled across fur and ice, over bodies braced to maul, and the ready cruelty in those wolves faltered. One sat like a dog that has heard a whistle that lives in its memory. Another turned, confused at its own restraint, and snapped, not at us, at the shadow beside it, anger shattering into something raw and young. The ones beyond, out of reach, shoved forward and bit at anything that moved, irritated by the calm ahead. Frenzy hates seeing its mirror cleaned. From the wall, Meroth's voice cut thin and furious. Sorcery. Seize the girl! Kale didn't look up. Roran. The beta was already moving. 3 of the king's guard flowed to the stairs like water seeking the lowest arrogance. Meroth realized a beat late that he had chosen the wrong kind of high ground. Open the Sally Gate, Kale said. We don't bleed them through teeth. They'll stack and climb the dead. Sally Gate'll put you outside with a handful of men, Roran warned. That's not a tactic. That's a dare. Kale's mouth found the idea of a smile and left it there, small and sharp. Sometimes the door has to be kicked from the other side. Take me, I heard myself say. Roran stared. Out there? Kale didn't. He was already measuring the courtyard with a glance, the way men do when they are about to write new rules with their bodies. She comes, he said, under my shoulder. Majesty, Roran started. You can keep me alive by arguing, Kale said gently, or by covering the gate. Roran's jaw clenched on a lifetime of objections. He nodded once, the kind of nod that turns into a scar later. Come back with your skin, both of you, we moved. The Sally Gate bit open, narrow and mean. Cold hit like an accusation. The rogues surged toward the new opening. Too many legs, too many eyes, too much need. Kale went first, low and fast, soared a line that made other lines for bodies to fall along. I kept tight at his side the way he'd taught me in 3 steps and a look. The warmth coiled in my chest, waiting for the breath that would invite it to behave. "Now," he said, like a drum telling a regiment how to remember rhythm. I exhaled and the world brightened. Not to sight, not to sound, but to something the body keeps for emergencies. Heat spread thin across the snow in a fan, not burning, not even melting, simply asking everything it touched to choose. A wolf launched for my throat. Mid-air it blinked, yelped like something embarrassed, and slammed shoulder first into the ground. Momentum spent on shame. Kale used mercy the way a blacksmith uses tongs, without flinching, and only to finish the job. He moved in the clean geometry of trained violence, cutting hamstrings, breaking jaws, turning killers into problems that could be carried. None of it was kind. All of it was necessary. The mark at my wrist pulsed like an extra heart, and I felt his satisfaction roll through me in a warm tide that returned slick, with my fear until both were one temperature, and Alpha stepped from the blur of bodies, not larger, not meaner, simply the point the others tilted around. Scar down the muzzle, old iron in the shoulders, eyes almost human with the kind of stamina that breeds cruelty for convenience. It paced, choosing us as a thesis it intended to defend. Kale met it the way storms meet mountains. He did not roar. He set his boots and lowered his center and lifted his blade in a quiet line. The wolf tensed. The world in my chest tensed with it. "Don't take its hunger," Kyle said, voice steady. "Take its story. I didn't understand until I did." The warmth inside me leaned forward, not to smother, but to listen. The wave that left my palm was smaller, tighter, a perfect circle around the Alpha and me. It walked into the animal's eyes and returned carrying a picture. A winter den, ribs like bars under skin, pups born into a season that didn't care. Men at the border with iron smiles and traps that sang only once. A bite that scarred the muzzle. A lesson learned. Take first or die last. My breath broke. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it, and the wave left me on that apology. The Alpha's jaw loosened. It blinked. Its tail dropped 1/2 inch, the smallest surrender in the language wolves speak and kill for. Kale moved then, fast enough that the snow only figured out it had been kicked after the fact. Sword flat across the Alpha's nose, not to cut, to command. The wolf flinched as if struck by memory and stopped. Behind it, the line wavered. Roran chose the moment with a surgeon's cruelty. The portcullis rattled up 2 hands' breadth, enough for our wolves to slide under in a gray surge. They fanned out, not chasing, not chewing, herding. They carved the tide into channels and sent those channels back the way they had come. "Make them remember home," Roran shouted, and our wolves did, nipping at heels, turning bodies toward the trees, away from the easy meat of fear. Snow thickened. The sky pressed lower, suddenly tired of the whole idea of day. My knees suggested collapse. Kale's hand found my elbow and held it like a promise paid in advance. Over the horn's last note, another sound lifted, thin, ugly, human, laughter. I turned toward the wall. Meroth had reappeared, finger bandaged, dignity not. He watched the rogues break with the irritation of a man whose story had been interrupted by truth. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Well done, Majesty," he called, every syllable dipped in bile. "You've taught our enemies to sit. Shall we invite them to sup?" Kale looked up, unreadable. "You first," Meroth's smile curdled. He vanished from the crenelle again, a weasel learning tunnels. We pressed the last of the rogues to the tree line. The Alpha backed into shadow, head low, eyes on me rather than the sword that could choose to unmake it. I felt the circle inside me close with a soft click. The warmth sank, sated for now, leaving a clean ache like the emptiness after a hard truth. "Go," I said to the wolf, not with my mouth, with that other door. "Take them away from my walls." It twitched, as if surprised to find room between command and refusal, and then turned. The tide went with it, breaking apart into streams of gray that threaded the pines and were gone. Silence fell. A real one, not the kind packed with teeth, only breath and the soft complaint of leather. Snow settled itself as if ashamed of the fuss. Roran came through the gate at a run, slowed when he saw us upright, and let relief slip out of him like air from a punctured wineskin. "We're counting bodies," he said. "Ours are moving. Theirs are moving away. I'll take that math." Kyle nodded, scanning the tree line one last time, always measuring. Then he sheathed his blade and turned to me. "How do you feel?" "Like I swallowed a hearth." I touched my throat. Steam curled from my lips and didn't freeze. "And like I owe something." "You paid," he said. "You'll pay again. That's how change writes its ledgers." We crossed back through the Sally Gate. The yard watched with something like superstition disguised as gratitude. People want miracles. They don't want to feed them. As we stepped under the arch, I caught the briefest flare of silver at the corner of my eye. The mark, glancing itself in the polished edge of a shield, making sure it still existed. In the hall, heat closed around us. Kyle handed his sword to a guard and went directly for the stairs that climbed to the war room. "We don't get to breathe yet," he said. "If rogues press daylight, someone press them." "Meroth," I said. "Or his friends," Roran added. Fear travels well. On the landing, a boy in servant blue almost collided with us. He bowed and held out a small iron tube, sealed with wax. "For the king," he stammered. A runner left it at the outer postern, said it was from the temple. Kale took it, broke the seal with a thumb, and shook out a thin strip of parchment. He read, and something old and unpleasant moved behind his eyes. "What?" Roran asked. Kale handed him the strip and looked at me. "The temple invites us to a cleansing," he said dryly. "Sunset." "For your mark," Roran spat without ceremony onto the stone. "They want her in a circle she can't step out of." "They want proof," Kale said. "Of what she is, of what I'm not. What am I?" The question sounded smaller than I meant it to. He didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, because any shape he gave the truth would turn it into a cage. "Eat," he said instead. "Then we plan. If we refuse the temple, Meroth will call it confession. If we go, he'll bait a noose with incense." "I can always burn the rope," I said, and only then realized I meant it. The briefest curve touched Kale's mouth. "There are better ways to cut." He went ahead. Roran lingered half a step, as if weighing something heavy in each hand and deciding which one might break his wrist slower. "For what it's worth," he said, voice low. "I've seen curses. They take and take until men forget they had anything. Whatever that is in you, it gives. Don't let priests name it wrong." He left me with that, and the smell of snow in his wake. By late afternoon, the yard had become a mouth again, this time chewing on the story it had just been fed. Servants moved with their heads together. Soldiers cleaned weapons with more attention than metal required. The wolves slept in graceless puddles, sudden and absolute, as if rest had found them with a club. I sat on the edge of the fountain and tried to decide whether water made of melted snow counts, as the same thing as river. Kale found me there. He came without guards, without cloak, without the practiced Wait King's drag when rooms need reminding. He sat beside me like a man doing a difficult thing in the easiest way. For a while we listened to the slow drip in the basin. Snowflakes died on contact and gave the water nothing it didn't already own. "What did you see?" he asked. "When you touched the alpha?" "Cold," I said, "and hunger that learned letters. It spelled itself into law." He nodded, unsurprised. "I saw men with traps." I watched his hands. Linen clean, burns under wraps that would hold until they didn't. "You don't hate them." "I don't forgive them," he said. "That's a different coin. Meroth will bring both to the temple," I said. "Hate and forgiveness. He'll spend whichever buys him a crown." Kyle looked at the sky, measuring distance with eyes that didn't flatter hope. "At sunset we go," he said. "We walk into their circle. We bring our own door, and if it closes, then we break the floor." He stood, held out a hand, and I took it because there are times when not taking the offered hand is the same as choosing the wrong god. The mark thrummed, once, hard, like a drum saying, "Now." We crossed the yard together as the sun slid behind the ridge and set the undersides of the clouds on quiet fire. The bell tolled vespers, each note walking down the spine of the citadel, like fingers that had learned their way in the dark. The temple waited beyond the inner wall, old as the first mistake and twice as certain. At the gate, Kale paused. He looked at me the way men look before they step onto a river they're not sure is frozen enough to hold. Not asking permission, not asking forgiveness. Asking partnership. "Don't choke it," he said. "I won't," I said, and for the first time since dawn, believed myself. We went to meet the priests with snow still in our hair and wolf sleep in the corners of the yard, carrying on our skin the smell of a fight that ended because we decided it should. The mark shone under the last light and then made its own. Inside the temple, candles waited like teeth. The temple ate sound and gave it back sanctified. Steps that should have echoed came back as confessions. Candles stood in serried ranks, flames thin and upright, 1,000 small spines holding up the ceiling. The air smelled of beeswax and something older, cold stone that remembered blood. They'd laid the circle in the nave. Salt, iron filings, a little ash ground so fine it had forgotten it used to be wood. Runes had been brushed into the dust with a priest's careful hand and a liar's heart. At the circle's edge, 12 copper bowls burned with herbs that smoked silver. The smoke didn't drift. It chose direction. Toward me. Meroth waited beside the high priest like a man who had ordered a feast and now couldn't decide which dish to poison. The priest was a tall reed of a woman with hair braided so tight it made her forehead a blade. Her mouth smelled of mint and judgment. "Your Majesty," she said to Kale, and bowed less than a heartbeat. "We thank you for presenting the girl to the gods. It is a mercy to cleanse a stain before it spreads." Kyle's face went smooth. He could do that, turn expression off the way a man turns off a lamp when he doesn't want it to be seen using up oil. "If the gods want her," he said, "they can come take her." "That," Meroth said sweetly, "is what the circle invites." Roran stood one pace behind Kale's shoulder, where the danger lives. I saw where his gaze went, up to the narrow balconies where thin men held thin knives and pretended to be guardians, down to the flagstones where the chalk had been renewed too recently, sideways to the alcoves with their virgin saints and their hollow eyes. Once, this had been a place where people brought the weight they couldn't carry alone and left lighter. Now it was a storehouse for fear, sold in small candles at a price the poor could barely pay. The high priest took a copper rod and touched the circle's edge. The smoke sharpened. Somewhere beneath our feet, something metal hummed. Not a bell, a wire. "Step inside, child," she said to me, using the voice people keep for beasts they have decided to see as lambs. "If you are clean, the circle will let you out. And if I'm not?" I asked, not moving. "Then you will be made clean." Kyle didn't look at her. He looked at me, burned hands wrapped in linen, weight distributed so he could move in any direction and get there first. He didn't say don't. He didn't say do. He waited for me to name whether I belonged to fear or to the breath I had learned in fire. The first sensation was temperature, a pull toward cold that wasn't physical. I felt like a river asked to freeze on command. The second was weight, a hand on the back of my neck pressing me toward a floor that had been polished smooth by generations of knees. The third was sound, not the humming wire or the whispering smoke, but a low, patient chant woven into the chalk itself. Words that had started walking before men did. Bind. 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 The mark on my wrist tightened as if the band had shrunk. Pain popped in my palm, not sharp, not dull, bright, like a struck match. I knelt because the circle wanted me to look up, to set my eyes on the priest and the high geometry of stone, to forget that the real God lives at ground level where breath and blood commute. "Confess," the high priest said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room carried it into the places where people hide themselves from themselves. "What would you like?" I asked. My voice sounded far away, as if snow had fallen between my mouth and the air. "A list, a recipe?" Meroth tsked softly. "Defiance. You see, Majesty, what we coddle grows teeth." "I see a circle written by men who do not trust doors," Kale said. He stood on the chalk's edge, close enough that if I reached I could touch his boot. He wasn't allowed to enter. That was the circle's first rule, the law of cut flowers. Everything lovely in a vase as long as the stem is severed. The priest lifted the rod and swung it over my head. The smoke dipped. My mark flared and then blew out like a candle pinched between fingers. Panic snapped at my ankles, small, insistent bites. The urge to beg rose up with a sweet, choking perfume. I swallowed and it burned. "Confess," she said again. I closed my eyes because light had stopped telling the truth. The breath count found me. The old river discipline my mother had given me as a portable country. 4 in, hold, 4 out. The first set did nothing but make me aware of exactly how much I wanted to run. The second carved a small, stubborn room under my ribs. The third found a door in that room I hadn't known how to open. When I pulled it, heat answered. Not fire, the idea of fire. A warmth that promised light later if I could keep breathing now. It touched the mark from the inside and the band loosened by a hair. "Ask me something worth answering," I said. The priest's mouth barely moved. "What did you bring into our house, witch?" "Something you locked out of your heart," I said. A vow. The rod came down, not on my skin, on the chalk. It struck the circle with a sound like a bell being told a lie. The copper bowls guttered, then flared, then guttered again. The humming under the floor grew teeth. The smoke spasmed into shapes. Wolves' heads, moons, a hand with too many fingers. "Stop," Kyle said. The high priest didn't even look at him. "The king does not command the gods," she murmured, and drew a sign in the air that made the hair on my forearms lift to listen. Roran shifted, a man listening to a wind that says avalanche. The soldiers behind us moved into the posture called ready, feet set, knees soft, swords low, eyes high. The temple guards on the balcony did nothing because nothing had been commanded yet. Men trained in command will die of obedience. The circle closed around my throat. The hum tightened into a chord. Words braided themselves through it, old and smooth and brute, with having been said by too many mouths for too long. Let go. Let go. Let go. I saw my mother drowning, her pockets full of stones, her eyes full of sky. Not exactly as it happened, but in the shape the brain prefers, the kind that makes guilt a necklace worn to every feast. I saw Cale burning again on the pyre, except his back didn't stop the fire this time and my lungs filled with smoke, and the ash wrote a line through my name. I saw the wolves kneeling to a false moon, their eyes cloudy, their teeth boring themselves to sleep. "Enough," Kyle said, and stepped into the circle. The chalk spit. The copper bowls went flat with a sound like tongues bitten to blood. The hum reared and broke on him, then tried again, then failed in a way that will always taste like salt to the failure. The circle didn't forbid kings. It forbade bonds. When he crossed, the mark on my wrist leapt as if it had seen a hand reach for its own. The high priest's head jerked up. "Majesty," she snapped, and finally lost the mint. "You insult the gods." "They keep strange servants," Cale said, and knelt beside me. Pain glanced his face and had nowhere to stay. He put his burned hands on either side of my jaw, thumbs against the hinge where truth gets ground into lies. Everything outside narrowed to the exact width of his gaze. "Breathe," he said. "I am," I said. "Then breathe with me." He inhaled. I matched him. He held. I held. He let the air go and took everything I couldn't keep with it. Once. Twice. The third time something let go that wasn't mine. A piece of the circle. A piece of the chant. A piece of the weapon the temple thought it had built. The humming wire under the floor snapped. It didn't sound like a wire. It sounded like a throat deciding it was done with the song it had been forced to sing. The chalk stank of singed salt. The smoke recoiled. The copper bowls went out with the sulky sigh of candles denied their ending. "Blasphemy," Meroth cried, relief and fury braided into a rope he desperately needed the room to pull on. Cale stood very slowly, like a man on a deck that has decided to call itself a floor again. He reached down and took my hand. The mark shone. I have no other word for it. Not glowed. Shone. Light came from the band and touched the air like a blind man mapping a new house with his palms. "The gods seem to like it," he said. The high priest was no fool, only in debt. Her eyes took in the broken wire, the dead bowls, the live mark. She weighed them against a ledger she carried where her ribs met. The math did not balance in favor of her continued dignity. "Remove them," she said to the guards. Gently, for now. Temple men moved. Steel made its little O sound. Roran stepped forward into the polite space before blood. "I'll carve the first one who takes a step," he said softly, and meant it, and made the meaning a place they could see themselves dying. "Stand down," Cale told him without changing anything about his stance but the angle of his chin. "We're leaving." "Majesty," Meroth protested, "you cannot allow this failed experiment," Cale suggested. "The circle cut its maker." Meroth's mouth thinned to a coin slot. "The people will hear of this." "Good," Cale said. "Make sure they hear the part where you tried to bake a girl in a pie and the pastry refused you." We backed toward the doors, not running, not turning our backs to men who hadn't earned that view. The guard on the balcony did what well-trained men do when the men below them choose a fight that won't save them. They decided they had not been given orders. The high priest stared at the wire as if it might claim it had never met her. At the threshold, the mark tugged my hand. Not out, sideways. To the left, where a saint stood carved into stone, moon at her feet, wolf at her knee, hand lifted in a gesture the priest told stories about and never, ever performed. The sigil cut into the base of her plinth was old enough that weather had turned it into a question. The tug became a pull. I moved before I could decide not to. "Ilara?" Cale warned. "Wait," I said, and touched the stone. It was cold. Then it wasn't. The cold peeled away like bark, and there, underneath, was warmth. Not mine, not his. The temple's. The part of it that had been built by hands without knives in them. The part that had listened when the poor came and given back bread instead of words. The part that had slept while men made wires under its floor. A seam in the plinth opened under my palm. Stone split with a reluctance so dignified it felt like courtesy. I slid my fingers into the gap and came out with a small disc, no bigger than a coin, slick with oil that had not been applied by any hand alive. Silver, etched with a mark so fine it looked like a hair had signed it. A circle with a line through it. Not a band, a balance. I turned and pressed it into Cale's palm. His burned skin didn't complain. The mark on my wrist flared, then steadied, as if pleased with an answer it hadn't known it had asked for. "What is it?" he murmured. "A door key," I said, and didn't know how I knew. We walked out of the temple under a sky that had decided evening didn't need to be beautiful, to be honest. Snow had stopped. The yard had collected whispers and was spinning them into rope. When the doors closed behind us, the silence on the other side had the shape of a knife tucked back into a sleeve. Roran exhaled the breath he'd owed the gods and then charged us interest. "You shouldn't have gone in," he said. "We had to," Cale said. "I know we had to," Roran said. "That's why I hate it." We crossed the yard. Men found things to do with their hands to avoid clapping. Wolves lifted their heads and tasted the air, then went back to sleep, their job carried elsewhere. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to vomit. I wanted bread and a blanket and my mother's voice telling me the names of the stars I keep forgetting, because I don't look up enough. We had almost reached the solar when Ivan barreled, out of a side passage like a man chased by a thought. Scrolls under one arm, ink on his knuckles, hair in the state scholar's hair lives in when truth has chosen them as a vessel and refused to be polite about it. "Majesty," he gasped. "The ash mark binds a vow," Cale said. Ivan shook his head hard enough to dislodge a decade of dust. "More. It doesn't just bind. It balances." I held up my wrist. The silver band caught the hall light and held it like a promise. "Between what and what?" "Between what was taken and what was given," Ivan said, words tripping. "When you covered her on the pyre, the old law wrote a ledger line. The circle tried to erase it. Ledger ink does not care for circles." Roran rubbed a hand down his face. "Speak the soldier's tongue." "If someone pulls you apart," Ivan said, pointing at the space between our bodies as if measure were a weapon, "you both pay. But if you move toward each other, willingly, the mark can..." "Lend. Lend what?" Cale asked. "Heat," Ivan said. "Breath, strength. Whatever the smaller fire needs from the larger to keep from dying." I felt the world tilt. "Not much. Enough to let a single new idea roll into the room." "You mean, if he weakens, I can carry him?" "And if you burn," Ivan said softly, "he can cool you." A small, reluctant laugh broke from somewhere behind my ribs. We're a hearth. We're a problem, Roran corrected. For men who like their fires chained in their own rooms. Cale looked at the coin in his palm. He had closed his fist around it without noticing. When he opened his hand, the disc clung to his skin as if magnet had been invented early just for this purpose. He turned it. The hair-thin mark looked like the line chalk makes when the hand that draws it doesn't need to look to know where the curve belongs. Dorky, he said, and when he said it, it became true. For what door? Ivan asked. The one under the citadel, Cale said. The one we've been pretending is a foundation and not a throat. They pushed rogues at us at noon and invited us to kneel at sunset. The third blow is always hidden where you won't look because you love what stands on top. Roran groaned, fond and furious at once. You and your doors. Kel turned to me. You choose? It wasn't really a question. It was a courtesy. He would go if I said no. He would go if I said yes. The only difference would be whether his back learned the shape of my hand or the shape of the thing that would try to pull him down there. Breathe, I said, because it was either be brave or be someone else. We went down. The old stairs that lead into the citadel's root had been shut with iron a generation ago. Iron remembers what it's been asked to do. The keycoin didn't fight it. It touched the lock in the lock's side, old work done by a younger hand, and opened. The air that rose had not been in lungs for a century. It smelled like words before they're spoken. Torchlight made the stone sweat honey. Runes ran along the walls. Some familiar, some the kind of script that makes your teeth ache when you realize you're reading it despite having never learned. The passage opened into a chamber that had never been empty of intention. At the center stood a dais. On the dais, an altar. On the altar, a bowl cut from a stone so black it ate light and asked for more. Roran circled it like a dog reading a complicated story in a stranger's footprints. I don't like how it looks at me. It's a mirror, Ivan said. It looks like a well, I said. Cale rested his fingers on the altar's rim. His bandage left no stain. It's both. It's an answer that asks back. Symbols had been carved into the floor around the dais. Circles within circles. Lines that intersected and then pretended not to. A map of choices someone had wanted to freeze into law. The ash mark on my wrist warmed. I understood somehow that if I stepped into the wrong ring, the room would set me on a road I could never leave. Some roads are like that. You think you're traveling them. They're wearing you as shoes. We don't step there, Cale said. We step where the stone has been touched by hands that didn't want to own it. How do you know which is which? Roran asked. You look for places that look like they've been cried on, Cale said, and smiled without humor. We found it. A patch at the base of the dais where the stone had been polished by knees that had not been genuflecting to power, but begging it to be something else. I knelt there. The warmth in my chest rose with the ease of steam finding a crack. Ask it, Cale said. What? What you asked at the pyre when you didn't know you were asking. I put my palms on the stone. The mark flared and then forgot to go out. The bowl's surface moved, not with liquid, not with light, with both. A picture formed. Not a picture. A memory belonging to the room itself dragged up through its own throat. I saw the first alpha kneel where Cale stood, younger and teeth-bright and arrogant the way kings are when they haven't yet failed tastefully. I saw a woman beside him, the saint from the plinth before she'd become stone. The room breathed with them the way lungs breathe when they've been asked to hold water. Balance, the woman said, her voice a river with its own moon, or we drown. Bind me, the alpha said, cocky with a mouth that hadn't learned to be careful with verbs. Make me safe for them, she struck him. Not to harm, to wake. You are not meant to be safe, she said. You are meant to be held to account. She cut her palm and let blood fall into the bowl. He did the same. The liquid went black, then silver, then something no sight deserves to be expected to explain. When they touched the bowl together, the room flashed and the mark that glowed on their wrists was the same small circle with the line through it. The picture ended as cleanly as a door shut by a wind that knows exactly where it is going. The warmth in me settled thin and sharp. The temple stole the wire, Ivan whispered, ashamed for a building that had lost its way. They tried to make a circle that replaced this. Men prefer levers to doors, Kyle said. Levers let them stand outside. What happens if we touch it? I asked, looking at the bowl. Cale looked at my bandageless hand, then at his bandaged one. We find out whether the ledger writes in ink or fire. Roran sucked in air. Or we find out if the bowl likes to eat. We ask it, Cale said again, relentless with his doors. He took my wrist, the marked one, and turned my palm upward. He lifted his own, breath catching when the linen stuck. Ivan made a small sound, and then had the mercy to keep it behind his teeth. On 3, Cale said, and didn't count. He set his hand in the bowl. I followed a heartbeat later because I have never learned to be late for disaster if it means not being alone. The bowl seized us, not a grip. Those let go. Not a bite, bites chew and end. This was a decision. Heat rose through our skin as if the stone itself were the mouth of something that had been promised dinner. My breath hitched. Cale's jaw locked. We did not pull away because the door does not open for men who knock, and then run. Light blew through us, not around. Through. I felt his back at the pyre again, and then felt my own bones remember that they had been asked to be a shield for each other, not a weapon. The ledger line wrote itself in a language candles cannot burn, and knives cannot scratch. Given here, taken there, balanced thus. Under it, another line, only together, pain eased. The bowl let go with the obscene reluctance of a mouth asked to release the fruit it has finally found the seed of. We pulled our hands free. The bandage on Cale's palm had stuck. When it came away, the burns beneath were pinker, cleaner. The thin, stubborn stink of cooked skin had gone. I turned my wrist. The ash mark had changed. The circle and the line had braided themselves into the loop. No longer just a band around my pulse, but a sign inside it, I think, I said, and couldn't say it without laughing a little because terror and joy share a mother. We stole the temple's circle and taught it a better trick. Roran exhaled like a man who has survived his own funeral. We should go upstairs and tell Meroth his toy is broken. Kyle closed his fist over the coin. We don't tell him anything. Why not? Because I want to see whether a man who loves levers knows what to do when the door he thinks he owns refuses to remember him. The chamber shivered. Not stone. Intention. The old vow had woken and turned its face toward the floor above, where wires still wound and priests still breathed and Meroth still practiced speeches into polished brass. From far up, muffled by weight and history, a horn sounded. Not the ridge horn. Not the gate. The city's river horn. The one they blow when water chooses a new path. Roran looked up as if he could see through rock. What now? Now, Cale said, voice thin with fatigue and thick with something like satisfaction. We make them confess. He offered his hand. I took it. The mark beat once against his pulse, then settled into a rhythm men could march to. We went up into a citadel that had learned something without being taught, and out into a yard where snow had started again. Not sharp. Not heavy. Soft. A blessing that looks like inconvenience, and feeds everything if you have a roof. The temple doors were open. People had gathered not because they'd been summoned, but because rumor has always worked faster than bells. Meroth stood at the top of the steps, cloak like a stain against the stone, mouth mid-sentence, hands mid-gesture, the pose of a man whose story had been interrupted by the ending arriving on time. The high priest beside him was pale with the knowledge that costs naming. Behind them, temple men held wires like whips that had turned to snakes in their hands. Cale didn't shout. He didn't need to. The yard had been waiting for a voice that would let it stop pretending it wasn't holding its breath. You tried to bind what was meant to balance, he said. Meroth rallied. We tried to save this kingdom from witchcraft. You tried to save your lever, Cale said. The door remembers who it was made for. He lifted his hand and opened his fist. The coin lay there, indecent with certainty. The mark on my wrist answered, just enough to make the people nearest us feel the hair lift along their arms. What is that? Someone asked, voice thin with wonder. What does it mean? It means, Cale said, and looked not at Meroth, but at everyone else, that a vow made in the open weighs more than a lie told in a circle. He turned to me, not for show, not for permission, for partnership. Ilara, I stepped forward, the circle in my wrist brightening not to blind, just to write clearly. You wanted a cleansing, I told Meroth and the priest in the wires. Here it is. I opened my palm, and the warmth moved, not in a wave, not in a wall, across faces. It didn't burn. It made men feel their own breath. It made women hear their own pulse. It made the fear in chest sit down and admit it was tired. The wires fell from the guard's hands. The high priest bowed her head. It wasn't to me. It wasn't to Kale. It was to the part of her that remembered bread. Meroth smiled a terrible, skinny smile. Pretty tricks, he said, sounding exactly like a man who had discovered all the handles on his favorite door had been removed. But doors are for buildings. Crowns aren't held up by architecture. They're held up by necks. He snapped his fingers. From the roofs, from the alley mouths, from the edges where shadow meets plan, men lifted bows. Not temple guard. Not councilmen. Hired wolves who had learned to stand on two legs for coin. Down, Roran barked, already moving, sword out, shield up, violence waking in his limbs like an old friend. Kale didn't flinch. He didn't reach for me. He stepped forward and raised his burned hand like a man about to turn back a tide with his fingers. Don't choke it, he said. I won't, I said, and breathed. The first arrows fell toward us like rain that has forgotten mercy. And the mark answered. They fell like rain that had learned hate. Black-feathered, thin-voiced, 100 small decisions choosing our hearts. The mark rose in my wrist as if a string had been pulled from under my skin. The warmth did not burst. It breathed, once deep, and the air between the bows and our bodies thickened. Not with flame, but with mercy sharpened to a shield. The first arrow struck nothing, and found itself ash. The second softened mid-flight, a reed that remembered it had begun as grass. A dozen more slowed to a child's curiosity, tapping the veil and falling with the sound winter makes when it decides not to harden after all. Not all. 3 kept their hunger. Their shafts were oiled black, their heads a metal that drank light. The warmth reached for them and slid off, slick as rain off oiled leather. Roran saw it too. Moon iron, he roared, lifting his shield. They've minted the old blasphemy. One arrow turned its mind toward my chest. Kale moved like his bones had rehearsed this moment without telling him. He came through me, between me and the arrow, his body remembering the pyre. The world narrowed to a black tip, drawing a thin line of intent from roof to rib. Kale. My voice hit the shield and came back smaller. The arrow struck the mark, not my flesh, the band of silver around my pulse that had never asked for permission to exist. There was no thunder, no bright scream of light. There was the clean, obscene click of a lock choosing its key. The arrow, head kissed the band, sparked, quietly, and crumbled the way frost crumbles under a thumb when the sun has already made its decision. Slag and ash fell at our feet with the shamed sound of money returned. A second arrow cut for Kale's throat. He did not duck. He exhaled, the count we shared, and turned his burned palm toward it. The bandage smoked. The arrow shivered like a lie forced to stand before its maker and split, shaft to splinters, head to dull silence, 2 paces from his skin. The third had no poetry. It went for Roran's eye. The beta raised his shield late. Even men who have been taught to be gods miss a beat when the world stops pretending to be kind. The head grazed bronze, kissed bone, and would have ended the arithmetic of a good man if the warmth hadn't reached it like a hand to a ledge and asked. It slowed. It sulked. It fell. Forward, Roran barked anyway, because bodies obey orders even when miracles have already done the heavy work. Our line surged up the steps, shields up, blades low, anger disciplined. Wolves woke like spilled, shadow and took the side alleys, jaws open, eyes bright, killing nothing they didn't have to. On the temple threshold, Meroth's smile tried to decide whether to be a snarl or a sermon. He chose both, and looked like a man whose tailor had lied to him. "Shoot again!" he screamed at the rooftops. "Moon iron! Aim for the king!" No second volley came. The hired bows had seen their clever metal turn to shame and chose a different god, self-preservation. One by one, bows lowered like hands learning to apologize. Wolves blackened edges the way night does when it gets curious. Men decided their ankles belonged to them and ran. The high priest did not run. She stood with mint on her breath and debt in her eyes and stared at the broken wire still looped like a dead snake on the floor behind her. She looked at the coin in Kyle's fist and the mark on my wrist, and then at the people. At the way they were watching not for spectacle, but for permission to stop being afraid. She bowed to us. Not deep, not theater, enough to move air. "Chancellor," she said, without turning her head, "call your men off." Meroth laughed. "They are not my men." "That," Cale said mildly, "is the first true thing you've said today." Roran's wedge hit the bottom step. Steel spoke to bone in the old language and made it remember second thoughts. Temple guards backed, not cowards, not fools, tired of being used as furniture in a room where men argued about gods. Meroth took a step back into the nave's dark, then turned. He did not flee. He slid sideways into shadow the way weasels do when the henhouse light comes on. No guilt, only tactics. "Let him run," Roran hissed. "No," Kyle said. "He doesn't run, he repositions." The high priest's jaw clenched. "There is a door at the apse," she said, not to excuse, to warn. "It opens into the old catacombs under the market. It should be bricked." "It isn't," Cale and I said together, and the mark thrummed yes. "Take the hall," Cale ordered. "Hold it. No blood unless it is the price for breath." Roran's eyes lit with the quick, fierce relief of a soldier, given a rule he can respect. "You heard him," he barked. "Bones, not throats. Push." He left a wedge of men for the steps and a spine line through the nave, then angled a handful after us. Wolves and 3 guards with eyes that had learned to read corners. Even stumbled up panting from the yard, clutching his satchel like a penitent clutches a relic. "You're not going after him alone," he gasped, already trotting to keep up. "Good," Kyle said. "I need a man who knows how to tell truth from decoration." We slid through incense and shadow into the apse, a half-circle of old stone where saints watched with the indifference of walls. Behind the altar, a slab that had pretended to be a wall for a century remembered it was a door. The coin warmed in Kyle's hand. The seam sighed. Stone shifted with the dignity of a dowager, making room for an uninvited guest who might be family. The passage beyond breathed cold that tasted like secrets kept too long. We went down with torches that made the dark resentful rather than blind. The stairs were steep and slick with the history of feet. The wolves' paws found holds where boots would not. They flowed ahead and then back, silent statements that nothing bigger than a thought moved in front of us. For now. "What is he reaching for?" I asked, because naming the shape of fear sometimes convinces it to get smaller. "Leverage," Cale said. "A lever he thinks we can't touch and a story he can sell with it." "Moon iron," Ivan panted. "A tool to sever bonds. Old texts were written by men afraid of doors," Cale cut in. "Moon iron can bruise a vow. It does not erase one made in the open." "What if he aims it at you?" "Then you'll hear a very creative prayer," Cale said dryly, and moved faster. The stairs spat us into a junction where tunnels went. Off like lies, neat at first, then messy, then all leading back to the same room no matter how clever you felt. The mark tugged my hand to the left, then to the down, then to the place where water spoke. "Listen," I said. They heard it too. Not a river. The market well, breathing people's wishes up and down its throat. Far ahead, feet scuffed. A small sob cut and swallowed. A voice like polished bone soothed it. Meroth hadn't taken a relic. He had taken a child. We reached the well chamber, with our breath winter sharp and our patience summer thin. The room was round, brick-lipped, ribbed by arches. The well's mouth sat at the center like a coin on a palm extended for alms. Ropes hung from hooks where buckets slept. Torches threw a yellow that made stone look like old teeth. The market's underside smelled like spilled wine, onion skins, coin, fear. Meroth stood at the far arch, cloak pulled close, hand in a boy's hair. The child couldn't have been 10. Thin, eyes too big, the kind of kid who learns to run before he learns to eat. A moon-iron dagger licked light at the boy's throat. Cale stopped the way a storm stops outside a door it will not break while a child sleeps against it. His voice went low and even, the exact tone you use when talking to a horse who has iron in his mouth and a bad idea in his eyes. "Let him go," he said. "No threat, no bargain." A fact offered gently, as if the world had simply always worked that way and could be reminded. Meroth's smile glistened. "You taught the city to love a girl with a mark," he said, tone honeyed over rot. "Let it learn what your love costs. Step back, Majesty, both of you, or I will teach the crowd a new prayer." Roran's whisper scratched the air near my ear. "I can put a knife through his eye from here." "No," Cale said softly. He'd turned the wrist on his way down because he's practiced that lie in his head 1,000. The boy whimpered. Meroth stroked his hair like a pious man strokes a relic and pressed the dagger in, just enough to draw a thin red punctuation. The warmth in my chest reared like a horse that has had enough of being asked to be patient while someone breaks its legs politely. The mark beat hard enough to ache. It wanted to burn. It wanted to heal. It wanted to turn the dagger to sorrow and the man to salt. "Don't choke it," Kyle said, without looking at me. "I won't," I said, and didn't recognize my own voice. It had become a place more than a sound. I opened my hand. Not a wave. A thread, thin as a hair, bright as a promise, almost invisible, slid through the air between Meroth's dagger and the boy's neck and wrapped itself around fear. Not the boy's. Meroth's, he flinched. Only a heartbeat. Only enough to show me where his fear lived. Not in death, not in pain. Both tools he understood, in being seen. In the moment, people's eyes stop believing the story you tell about yourself. I pulled. The cloak slipped from his shoulder. It caught on the dagger hand, bared the bandaged finger that my mark had bloodied at noon. The boy felt the pressure ease and moved like water poured out of a cup that thought it could hold it. He dropped, not away from the blade, through the gap between Meroth's legs. A tiny, perfect miracle paid for by 1,000 small fears the boy had learned to use. Roran was already moving. Wolves were already shadows with teeth. Cale went forward with the calm of a man mounting a gallows he built for someone else. Meroth tried to pivot the dagger to a king's heart. The mark caught its edge the way a ring catches a lover's sleeve. Softly, decisively, the blade stuttered. Cale's hand closed on Meroth's wrist and stopped the story. "You don't get levers anymore," he said, voice gentle and final. "You get balance." He twisted. Bone made a small, usable noise. The moon iron sang once, the thin song metal makes when it surrenders, and fell. A wolf put its paw on the blade and looked at Cale for the rest of the sentence. "Bind him," Roran said. "Not triumph, housekeeping. And not in silk." The boy clung to my skirts with the grip children learn when they have had to hold on to themselves too long. I crouched. My hands were dirty with the day's math. I made them soft anyway. "You did that," I told him, and felt the truth make his bones a shade heavier in a good way. "That was yours." His chin jerked. He did not trust words yet, but he tasted this one and decided it might feed him. Templemen arrived at a run from the nave side, knives put away, hands empty. The high priest came behind them, mint turned to wintergreen, eyes to iron. She took in Meroth's wrist, the fallen blade, the boy, the coin in Cale's palm, and the mark on my wrist, and made a decision that cost her something visible. "Put him on his knees," she said, "and not before the altar." "Before the well, they did," Meroth laughed, a small, ugly sound that tried to buy back dignity on a cheap street. What will you do, drown me? Make me confess to water? The high priest knelt. The city's well breathed softly, a lung that had carried wishes it never spent. We will ask the only God that still eats truth, she said, and lowered her head until her brow touched the stone lip. Name your debt, she whispered to the bricks to teach the room how to listen. Name it aloud. The chamber waited the way a court waits when the judge has finally lifted her pen. Cale didn't look at Meroth. He looked at the people peering down the steps, their faces 100 small moons. You saw, he said. You know, but say it so your own ears can hear you. A baker in the back, flour on hair, grief on hands, spoke first. He sent men to take bread for the temple tithe after my boy coughed blood, she said, voice like rope. He called my empty attacks a smith. He bought my iron at law's price and sold it back for blood. A soldier. He told me to turn my shield and look at the sky while men who wore the temple's color took what they said the gods had written in their sleep. The words filled the room until there was no air left for lies. Meroth's smile cracked. Not shattered, cracked, like ice deciding it had misjudged the season. He looked at the well. It doesn't drink men, he said, trying for a sneer and landing on small. It drinks wishes. It drinks what is given, the high priest said. Give it your story. If it floats, it's a lie. If it sinks, it was heavy enough to keep. You'll drown me. No, Cale said. You'll drown yourself if you tell the water something light. Silence laid itself down and forgot to breathe. Meroth broke, not loud, not noble. He lunged for the coin. Kings teach a city where to aim by how they stand. He aimed at Cale's open hand. The wolf on the moon iron dagger was faster. It did not tear. It pressed the blades flat across Meroth's throat, a gentleness with an edge, and pushed him back to his knees without breaking skin. The gesture was so insultingly careful that even humiliation felt too grand a word. Don't, I said, and the warmth rode the syllable like a rider who loves her horse more than winning. You were given a choice. Tell the water the story of who you are, or drown in the one you made. He stared at the well. For a blink, I saw the boy he had been. Hungry, clever, small, in a room where bigger men named the law and taught him levers. He opened his mouth. No confession came. From the tunnel behind us, new footsteps, measured, armored, carrying the mathematics of a different kind of debt. A rank of men in gray plate that had never bent to temple brass or council iron. Their captain lifted her visor and showed a face that carried storms politely. Majesty, she said to Cale, you sent for us once, when the north burned. You asked for an answer that would not change its mind when it was tired. We've come to be that answer. Roran's eyes lit. The warden's. Cale nodded once, an old chess piece sliding into a line he had carved in his head a year ago. Bind him to the well, he said. He will speak when he has learned the weight of his own tongue. They tied Meroth with rope that had done this before. Clean, simple, inexorable. The high priest set the moon iron dagger on the well's lip and stepped back. Debt paid in the coin she could afford. Truth in public. We're not done, Roran said softly as the wardens took the slack. Rogues with moon iron don't grow like mushrooms. Someone's farming them. Agreed, Cale said. He turned to me at last, and his face admitted the tired it had been holding at parade rest. You're shaking. I'm still a hearth, I said, teeth briefly finding a laugh. A small one. He lifted my marked wrist and pressed his burned palm to it the way men press their forehead to a door they're about to walk through. Heat moved, not from me to him or him to me, between equal and opposite, until both were steady. Balance, even whispered, wonder turning his voice into a younger thing. Saints keep us. No, the high priest said not unkindly. Keep yourselves. The saints are busy being stone. A ripple of rueful laughter loosened the room's spine. Above us, the market's day found its night. The well breathed. The ropes took weight. Meroth trembled with the terror of a man who has discovered that silence weighs more than shouts. Cale looked up the steps where faces waited with the new hunger of belonging. Go home, he said. Feed your own first. Tomorrow we count. Tonight we sleep with the doors open. And if the wolves come, someone called. Then we'll teach them borders without blood, I said. And the warmth agreed. And the wolves in the shadows stamped once. A soldier's salute learned in another language. We climbed from the catacombs into cold that had remembered how to be kind. Snow met our faces with the small forgiveness of flakes choosing not to cut. The temple doors stood open yet, but the room behind them had learned a new shape for the word holy. On the steps, Kale stopped and looked at the city, the rooftops like sleeping wolves, the streets like veins that had decided to carry something better than fear. We bought a night, he said. Tomorrow they'll raise a new lever. Then tomorrow we raise a new door, I answered, and laid my palm against his, the mark bright, the burn clean. The ledger balanced for now, from the ridge, a horn, not alarm. The low, long note that means gather, Roran's head tilted. Who called it? Kale smiled the dangerous, tired smile of a man who intends to finish the math he started at dawn. We did, he said, without lifting a finger. And far off, where the forest met the sky, wolves answered. One voice, then many. Not mourning, not hunger. Belonging. The night wrapped the city. The well breathed. The ropes took their quiet work, and somewhere beneath my ribs, the warmth settled like a guard dog by the door, eyes half closed, teeth put away, still listening. We had not won. We had begun. The gather horn held the note the way a hand holds a wound. Steady, necessary, unwilling to admire itself. Doors opened, windows unlatched, faces leaned out into a night that had decided not to lie. From the temple steps we watched a city remember it was a pack. Wardens in dull gray took their places like muscle waking around a bone. Roran moved among them with the ease of a man who knows which orders to give and which to borrow from better men. The high priest stood beneath her own lintel as if paying interest on a debt she'd avoided naming. Ivan tucked his satchel closer, ink on his wrists like bruises he was oddly proud of. Kale lifted 2 fingers. It was nothing. It was everything. The yard leaned in. We bought this hour, he said, voice a low thread woven into the night's fabric. Spend it on listening. The boy whimpered. Meroth stroked his hair like a pious man strokes a relic and pressed the dagger in, just enough to draw a thin red punctuation. The warmth in my chest reared like a horse that has had enough of being asked to be patient while someone breaks its legs politely. The mark beat hard enough to ache. It wanted to burn. It wanted to heal. It wanted to turn the dagger to sorrow and the man to salt. Don't choke it, Kale said, without looking at me. I won't, I said, and didn't recognize my own voice. It had become a place more than a sound. I opened my hand. Not a wave. A thread, thin as a hair, bright as a promise, almost invisible, slid through the air between Meroth's dagger and the boy's neck and wrapped itself around fear. Not the boy's, Meroth's. He flinched, only a heartbeat, only enough to show me where his fear lived. Not in death, not in pain, both tools he understood, in being seen. In the moment, people's eyes stop believing the story you tell about yourself. I pulled. The cloak slipped from his shoulder. It caught on the dagger hand, bared the bandaged finger that my mark had bloodied at noon. The boy felt the pressure ease and moved like water poured out of a cup that thought it could hold it. He dropped, not away from the blade, through the gap between Meroth's legs, a tiny, perfect miracle paid for by 1,000 small fears the boy had learned to use. Roran was already moving. Wolves were already shadows with teeth. Kale went forward with the calm of a man mounting a gallows he built for someone else. Meroth tried to pivot the dagger to a king's heart. The mark caught its edge the way a ring catches a lover's sleeve, softly, decisively. The blade stuttered. Kale's hand closed on Meroth's wrist and stopped the story. You don't get levers anymore, he said, voice gentle and final. You get balance, he twisted. Bone made a small, usable noise. The moon iron sang once, the thin song metal makes when it surrenders, and fell. A wolf put its paw on the blade and looked at Kale for the rest of the sentence. Bind him, Roran said. Not triumph, housekeeping. And not in silk. The boy clung to my skirts with the grip children learn when they have had to hold on to themselves too long. I crouched. My hands were dirty with the day's math. I made them soft anyway. You did that, I told him, and felt the truth make his bones a shade heavier in a good way. That was yours, his chin jerked. He did not trust words yet, but he tasted this one and decided it might feed him. Temple men arrived at a run from the nave side, knives put away, hands empty. The high priest came behind them, mint turned to wintergreen, eyes to iron. She took in Meroth's wrist, the fallen blade, the boy, the coin in Cale's palm, and the mark on my wrist, and made a decision that cost her something visible. Put him on his knees, she said, and not before the altar. Before the well, they did. Meroth laughed, a small ugly sound that tried to buy back dignity on a cheap street. What will you do, drown me? Make me confess to water? The high priest knelt. The city's well breathed softly, a lung that had carried wishes it never spent. We will ask the only God that still eats truth, she said, and lowered her head until her brow touched the stone lip. Name your debt, she whispered to the bricks to teach the room how to listen. Name it aloud. The chamber waited the way a court waits when the judge has finally lifted her pen. Kyle didn't look at Meroth. He looked at the people peering down the steps, their faces 100 small moons. You saw, he said. You know, but say it so your own ears can hear you. A baker in the back, flour on hair, grief on hands, spoke first. He sent men to take bread for the temple tithe after my boy coughed blood, she said, voice like rope. He called my empty a tax, a smith. He bought my iron at law's price and sold it back for blood, a soldier. He told me to turn my shield and look at the sky while men who wore the temple's color took what they said the gods had written in their sleep. The words filled the room until there was no air left for lies. Meroth's smile cracked. Not shattered, cracked, like ice deciding it had misjudged the season. He looked at the well. It doesn't drink men, he said, trying for a sneer and landing on small. It drinks wishes. It drinks what is given, the high priest said. Give it your story. If it floats, it's a lie. If it sinks, it was heavy enough to keep. You'll drown me. No, Kyle said. You'll drown yourself if you tell the water something light. Silence laid itself down and forgot to breathe. Meroth broke. Not loud, not noble. He lunged for the coin. Kings teach a city where to aim by how they stand. He aimed at Cale's open hand. The wolf on the moon iron dagger was faster. It did not tear. It pressed the blades flat across Meroth's throat, a gentleness with an edge, and pushed him back to his knees without breaking skin. The gesture was so insultingly careful that even humiliation felt too grand a word. Don't, I said, and the warmth rode the syllable like a rider who loves her horse more than winning. You were given a choice. Tell the water the story of who you are, or drown in the one you made. He stared at the well. For a blink I saw the boy he had been. Hungry, clever, small in a room where bigger men named the law and taught him levers. He opened his mouth. No confession came. From the tunnel behind us, new footsteps, measured, armored, carrying the mathematics of a different kind of debt. A rank of men in gray plate that had never bent to temple brass or council iron. Their captain lifted her visor and showed a face that carried storms politely. Majesty, she said to Cale. You sent for us once, when the north burned. You asked for an answer that would not change its mind when it was tired. We've come to be that answer. Roran's eyes lit. The wardens. Cale nodded once, an old chess piece sliding into a line he had carved in his head a year ago. Bind him to the well, he said. He will speak when he has learned the weight of his own tongue. They tied Meroth with rope that had done this before. Clean, simple, inexorable. The high priest set the moon iron dagger on the well's lip and stepped back, debt paid in the coin she could afford. Truth in public. We're not done, Roran said softly as the wardens took the slack. Rogues with moon iron don't grow like mushrooms. Someone's farming them. Agreed, Kyle said. He turned to me at last, and his face admitted the tired it had been holding at parade rest. You're shaking. I'm still a hearth, I said, teeth briefly finding a laugh. A small one. He lifted my marked wrist and pressed his burned palm to it, the way men press their forehead to a door they're about to walk through. Heat moved. Not from me to him or him to me. Between equal and opposite until both were steady. Balance, even whispered. Wonder turning his voice into a younger thing. Saints keep us. No, the high priest said, not unkindly. Keep yourselves. The saints are busy being stone. A ripple of rueful laughter loosened the room's spine. Above us, the market's day found its night. The well breathed. The ropes took weight. Meroth trembled with the terror of a man who has discovered that silence weighs more than shouts. Cale looked up the steps where faces waited with the new hunger of belonging. Go home, he said. Feed your own first. Tomorrow we count. Tonight we sleep with the doors open. And if the wolves come, someone called, then we'll teach them borders without blood, I said, and the warmth agreed. And the wolves in the shadows stamped once. A soldier's salute learned in another language. We climbed from the catacombs into cold that had remembered how to be kind. Snow met our faces with the small forgiveness of flakes choosing not to cut. The temple doors stood open yet, but the room behind them had learned a new shape for the word holy. On the steps, Cale stopped and looked at the city, the rooftops like sleeping wolves, the streets like veins that had decided to carry something better than fear. We bought a night, he said. Tomorrow they'll raise a new lever. Then tomorrow we raise a new door, I answered, and laid my palm against his. The mark bright, the burn clean. The ledger balanced for now, from the ridge, a horn, not alarm. The low long note that means gather. Roran's head tilted. Who called it? Cale smiled the dangerous, tired smile of a man who intends to finish the math he started at dawn. We did, he said, without lifting a finger. And far off, where the forest met the sky, wolves answered. One voice, then many. Not mourning, not hunger. Belonging. The night wrapped the city. The well breathed. The ropes took their quiet work. And somewhere beneath my ribs, the warmth settled like a guard dog by the door, eyes half closed, teeth put away, still listening. We had not won. We had begun. The gather horn held the note the way a hand holds a wound. Steady, necessary, unwilling to admire itself. Doors opened. Windows unlatched. Faces leaned out into a night that had decided not to lie. From the temple steps we watched a city remember it was a pack. Wardens in dull gray took their places like muscle waking around a bone. Roran moved among them with the ease of a man who knows which orders to give and which to borrow from better men. The high priest stood beneath her own lintel, as if paying interest on a debt she'd avoided naming. Ivan tucked his satchel closer, ink on his wrists like bruises he was oddly proud of. Cale lifted 2 fingers. It was nothing. It was everything. The yard leaned in. We bought this hour, he said, voice a low thread woven into the night's fabric. Spend it on listening. He sent men like birds, 1 to the gate, 1 to the temple, 3 to the barracks, 2 to the foundry stacks with orders to make smoke disappear. The wardens took the crates. Ivan walked between them, hands hovering as if the paper might ask him to hold it like a child. We turned for the citadel. The snow that had begun gentle had decided to mean it. Streets narrowed. Steps remembered how to advise caution. I felt the mark's pulse settle into Cale's as if the day had finally admitted it did, in fact, have an end. We were 2 corners from the inner gate when the night misbehaved. Not sound first. Light, thin, wrong, a blade slipped under a door. The wolves' heads snapped in unison toward the river bridge. The horn did not cry alarm. It stuttered. A frantic chopped code men use when their mouths are full of terror. Bridge, Roran said, already running. We cleared the last lane and hit the square at a sprint meant to make gods remember our names. The river had boiled itself into a question. Men ran. Women gathered children without counting, and moved like they were part of a body learning how to breathe through pain. At the bridge's crown stood 3 figures in cloaks too clean for this hour of any honest night. In their hands, a sigil that had no business being alive bent light into wrong. At their feet, a keg. Not pitch, not powder. A cask with rings of moon iron welded to its bands and symbols scratched with a drunk's arrogance into its hide. The keg sang, softly, a tooth-hurt note. Kestrel's other hand, Cale said, pulling up. A diversion and a sermon. What's it for? I asked, though the warmth in my chest had recognized it the way a body recognizes a fever it had as a child and hoped never to meet again. Breaking wells, Ivan said, horror loaning his voice another man's age, turning water faithless. The three in cloaks raised the sigil higher, as if it were a lantern and not a theft. The keg's song climbed a half step, and the river around the bridge footholds began to foam, not white like anger, gray like exhaustion. Wolves, Roran bellowed, and gray muscle moved. Wardens followed. The cloaked men did not run. They smiled like men who have been paid to die publicly and mean it. Don't let them finish the shape, Kyle said, eyes on the sigil's crooked geometry. They're calling the lever, I said, breath thin. The one we broke. The warmth stood in me. It didn't ask. It went, I ran. The bridge's stones were wet and mean. The air above the keg had the flavor of coins sucked too long by a liar. The men turned the sigil as I came, slow, loving, as if spinning a lover into a final dance. The song thinned to a wire and threaded itself toward the river's throat. I put my hand between the wire and the water. It cut. Not skin, truth. A line through a vow. The mark shrieked, and went bright enough for my teeth to taste it. Cale's breath hit mine like a hand thrown across a table to keep a glass from falling. Balance flew to meet the cut and found it mean. Don't choke it, he said, far away and everywhere. Make it choose, I opened, not a shield. Not a wall. A witness. I let the warmth see the sigil the way wolves see a man. By weight, by scent, by the way his feet forget they were taught to lie. It wasn't an object. It was a story written in lines that had never been meant to be straight. Men had drawn it. An older hurt had taught it. Water had been given no vote. Be what you are, I told the river. Not what their fear is trying to rent you for. It hesitated. Unbelievably. Rivers don't hesitate. They obey gravity like loyalty. This one paused like a beast that has just realized the hand on its neck is only a hand, not a god. Then it moved. Not against me, with the song snapped. The sigil's arms sagged. The cloaked men blinked, surprised at being mortal. Wolves hit them like polite avalanches. Throats spared, hands broken, sigil taken and ground under a warden's heel until it was polite enough to be dust. The keg still sang. The river pressed around its rings in a boil that smelled like forgetting. I started. Together, Cale said. His hand was already on my wrist. His other palm landed on the keg with the suicidal confidence of a king who had decided to live extremely publicly. He hissed. The bandage smoked. The mark met the moon iron rings and refused. The warmth found hinges again, edges again, broke them softly the way ice breaks when spring gets bored. The keg stopped. The song did not. It went inside. My breath faltered. I felt something old and patient stretch in the dark under the city, somewhere between stone and story. The bowl we had woken. The door we had taught to be kinder. It listened. Help us, I whispered. To a thing that had listened to men make requests and then stopped being men for a long time, or tell me what to break. It answered with a pull behind my heart so clean it hurt like an apology you owe yourself. I followed. The warmth followed. Cale followed because that is what he does when he decides a thing is his to carry. We let the keg go. It sank, the way guilt does when you stop baking cakes around it. The river took it and did not thank us. The note followed it down, low and sullen, and the old door under the citadel held, hard. A tremor marched through the bridge stones up into my knees. It stopped at the mark, tested it like a thief testing a window catch, and then withdrew with a hiss of sulphurous frustration. Silence fell. Not the triumph kind, the kind you get when a catastrophe chooses to walk past your house without knocking. Roran's hand landed on my shoulder with a slap. His relief refused to hide. You two are going to either save us or age us into sticks, he said. Possibly both by next dawn. The wolves shook the stink of bad geometry from their fur. The wardens bound men who had mouths full of loyal slogans and eyes full of the coin that had taught them the shape of those slogans. The river breathed. The bridge remembered how to be a bridge. Back to the citadel, Kyle said, voice rough with the miles the day had walked across it. We have ledgers to nail and a house to call to account. We went through streets where shutters opened just enough to let eyes and hope through. Snow changed its mind and became gentle again, as if embarrassed by its earlier performance. The temple's doors stood open, but no wires sang. The well breathed the way a sleeping child breathes when the night is done testing them. At the inner gate, a warden met us running. She didn't salute. She was too tired to be anything but honest. "Majesty," she panted. "The solar?" Every foot of stair between us and that room turned into a count. 4 steps in, hold, 4 out. The warmth lay very still in me, listening the way wolves listen at the edge of a clearing they don't yet own. We reached the landing, and the smell that met us was wrong. Not blood, not smoke. Memory. The odor rooms get when someone has taken something that belonged only to them, and the wood has not decided if it can forget. The doors hung open. The long table lay scattered with ledgers, maps, a clay cup broken where a hand that expected to meet a lip had met emptiness. The altar bowl, the black stone we had laid our hands in to teach the temple what doors are for, was gone. Ivan made a noise. I hope never again to hear a man make. Roran's sword was already out, as if steel could stab absence. Wolves skidded on wood and found no throat. On the table, scratched with the point of a knife into the waxed grain, where even years would not sand it out, a message. Bring the queen to the river at moonrise, or the pack drowns. Under it, a sign cut with quick, precise strokes. The same long wolf's head eating a moon. Tyvan Kale's hand closed so hard on the table edge I heard the wood remember being a tree. He didn't swear. He didn't look at me. He looked at the city through the window he'd stood at 1,000 nights and said quiet, almost tender, "They finally—" Snow ghosted the sill. The river horn blew once, long, low, a sound that remembered funerals. The warmth under my ribs woke and stood, ears forward, eyes bright, waiting for the word. "Moonrise," Roran said, glancing at the sky. "Clouds or not, it'll come. That's the kind of truth men like Tyvan hate." Ivan pressed shaking fingers to his mouth. "If they stole the bowl, they stole the mouth of the door." "Then we'll teach the river to drink from another cup," Kale said. He turned to me at last. The fatigue in his face had grown sharp enough to be called a blade. The pride in it had grown soft enough to be called a hand. "You choose." My fear rose politely, reminded me of all the ways water has to mean ending, then sat down because it had learned to behave. I laid my palm in his, felt the mark meet the burn, felt the ledger line write down another promise. "I'm tired of levers," I said. "Let's build them a door they can't find the hinges on." We moved. Orders ran. Wardens turned into angles on a map. Wolves took smells the city had been pretending not to have. The high priest followed us into the yard and handed Roran a bundle of white rope that looked like it knew how to forgive and when not to. "What is that?" he asked. "Saint's hair," she said, without mint, without lie. "Spun into cord a long time ago for binding ourselves when we forgot how to obey the right rules." Roran snorted softly. "I'll take humility on a string. Might be the first relic that does what it says on the cask." We reached the gate. Night had put on its hard face. The moon had not yet risen, but the sky had begun to shine with the promise of it, pale behind the cloud like a coin under skin. The river waited, patient as a debt. Kale took my wrist. I took his hand. The mark beat once, twice, then settled into the rhythm men who are not afraid walk to. Roran breathed out and did not try to hide the way it sounded like a prayer. We went down to the water to learn what kind of god Tyvan thought he was. Moonrise comes whether clouds agree or not. The sky wore its coin under gauze, pale light trying on the shape of yes. The river waited with the patience of a debt that had learned your name. We came down the long slope from the inner gate with snow hiss-whispering under our boots and wolves ghosting the flanks, wardens gray as caution. Roran's jaw set to the arithmetic of necessary things. They had picked the old floodworks for their altar, a stone mouth where iron teeth sit in a row and decide whether a city should breathe. The sluice platforms made a black ribcage over the current. Gears taller than men stood with their paint gone and their purpose eager. On the crown of the middle gate, a bowl glowed where it should not have been able to sit. The temple's black stone, stolen out of the solar and fitted with moon iron bands like shackles hammered on a god. Torches flared in 3 careful lines. Men stood with their faces turned to shadow for courage. At the center, Tyvan, cloak pristine the way guilt keeps its shirts, silver hair combed into righteousness, the same old wolf's head eating a moon stamped at his collar like a childhood lie he had learned to enjoy. Beside him, the masked archer, Kestrel, easy on the balls of his feet, bow low, danger high. Behind them, a handful of council loyalists and temple strays who hadn't learned yet what dead is for. A rope ran from the gate drum into the river's throat. It wasn't hemp. It gleamed white, almost luminous, as if it had grown down from a saint's skull and learned to be rope on the way. The other end coiled at Tyvan's feet. He rested one slipper on it, the way a man rests a hand on a chair he intends to pull out from under you. Meroth was not there. He had his own hole to inventory. "The Queen!" Tyvan called, and his voice worked very hard to be silk. "As invited. Invitations with knives inside are called ambushes," Roran said. His sword's point dipped toward the river, then rose, then settled, the blade equivalent of rolling shoulders. The wardens fanned, calm as walls built at the right angles. Kale stepped forward until river breath licked his boots. He didn't lift his chin. Kings who know their job already live at a height the city can see. "Let them go," he said softly. "Every hand you hired, every debt you called in, everyone you told they could be a little god in the wrong room. Let them go home before they learn how much work drowning is." Tyvan smiled for the people he thought were watching him in their heads. "Majesty," he said, and made the word mean child. "The pack is very large, and you've taught it to think. Perhaps it's time the river taught it to listen." He gestured. Men on the side gates leaned into rusted wheels. The iron teeth groaned. The river rose, foamed, hissed like something that had been kicked awake. The rope twitched, then went taut and sang. Just a hair, a rehearsal. I saw how the trick worked the way you see the knot inside a magic act once it's been done too close to your face. The bowl bound to the gate throat. The saint's hair tether knotted through the drum. The moon iron band scoring a crooked geometry deep into the door we had woken under the citadel. If they hauled, the river's vow would be yanked, not asked. The lower quarter would drown first. The kennels next. Wolves don't know maps. They know current. "Bring the Queen to the river," Tyvan said, letting the bowl's dull light paint his cheek like a confession he enjoyed. "Or the pack drowns. We can call it a cleansing if that helps your conscience sleep." Kyle didn't look at me. His burned hand closed once, a word in a language our bodies had learned before our mouths. "Choose." I stepped until the river looked me in the eye. The mark warmed, once steady. "I'm already here," I said. "You can stop pretending this is about arrival." My voice didn't waver. Fear had learned to keep its elbows to itself. Kestrel laughed. Two notes delighted at the idea of us. "She's brave," he told Tyvan, as if remarking on the weather. "Useful breed. Bravery is a leash," Tyvan said. "It makes kings bring their collars to you." He lifted his foot off the white rope and pinched it between two fingers, dainty. "Shall we count together?" Behind me, the wardens flowed wider along the bank. Roran tilted his head toward the rightmost wheel. Wolves moved without sound to the far abutment. The high priest stood just off the ice line, mint gone, eyes iron, hands on the other white rope coiled at her belt, the one she had pressed into Roran's palm at the gate. Saint's hair against saint's hair. Balance has a sense of humor when it's not busy saving your life. Kale's shoulder brushed mine. Our breath found the count we had been teaching it all day. 4 in, hold, 4 out. The bowl hummed, not a tone for ears, a pressure along the bone, and I felt the door under the city tilt, insulted at being used like a crank. It wanted to break. Breaking would feel like revenge for a second and ruin for a generation. "Levers are for people who don't trust doors," I said to Tyvan, "because the river listens to grammar more than it listens to screams. And you love levers." "I love order," he said. "Levers give you order when men forget how to kneel." "Order that needs drowning to keep its teeth," I said. "You were hungry in your childhood, Tyvan. A man who grew thin under other people's law. You learned the shape of hunger, and you taught it to wear a collar with your name on it. Take it off." For just a heartbeat, the mask slipped. His mouth thinned to the honesty fear makes when it isn't ready for company. Then it smoothed. "Pull," he said. The men at the wheels heaved. The rope jumped like a vein, The bull's hum scraped across my teeth. The river trembled, choosing between obedience and memory. "Don't choke it," Kyle said, calm as a hand on a wild animal's withers. "I won't," I said. I opened the door. Not mine. Ours. The one we had taught the city to remember in the temple, in the catacombs, in the foundry, on the bridge. The doormen can't own because it's made of breath and witness, of the way 100 chests decide to rise on the same beat. I felt the well under the market take a long, expectant inhale. The bull's stolen mouth complained. The river bent its ear to our ribs. The rope groaned. The saint's hair did not snap. It tightened. Prayer turned to punishment by a man who likes his gods when they sound like him. "Now," Cale murmured. And it wasn't an order. It was a partnership. We moved. Roran and the wardens hit the right wheel like disciplined weather. The high priest cast the coil at her belt across the gap. It took the air with the insulted grace of a relic used for necessary things and bit the midspan. Wolves leapt the stone lip and took the left wheel platform in a gray storm of teeth and restraint. Kestrel's bow snapped up, moon iron tip, quick, true, and broke itself in the light off my mark with a hiss like coin-learning charity. He didn't curse. He grinned and went for another arrow. "Cut his fingers," Roran shouted. "Leave him his hands," Cale said. "Make him choose with them," Steel rang. Bodies leaned into math. The rope surged again. Tyvan hauling as if pulling me forward would fix the river forever, and the bowl flared with a depthless black that made the night flinch. I stepped into the water. It was winter. It was a knife. It was a living thing that owed no one tenderness. It folded around my calves and then my knees and then my ribcage without negotiating. The breath learned swiftness that had nothing to do with panic. Cale's hand stayed on my wrist. The mark bit, then widened, then sang the way a scar sings when it is The current pulled at my cloak like a child who hasn't learned yet that love is not dragging. Beneath, deep, old, the door we had woken put its back under my feet, not as stone, as will. It lifted, not up, but toward. "Let it come through," Cale said. I didn't try to shield. Shields turn everything into impact and you into a Boolean. I opened and the river tasted something it hadn't in a long time. Honesty without bargain. It slowed a hair, surprised. The white rope at Tyvan's feet went heavier. Kestrel loosed. His arrow didn't aim at me. It aimed at the bowl's rim, at the point where Moon Iron and Vow kissed like cousins who can't decide whether to be ashamed. If he cracked the bond on their terms, the door would recoil. The river would buck. Roran saw it too late. Cale didn't. He took his hand from my wrist and caught the arrow mid-flight, not with fingers, with heat. His burned palm refused it. The shaft smoked, sulked, split, fell. He gasped once, quiet, like a man learning the weight of his own name. The bowl quivered. The rope belonged to Tyvan's hands again. He pulled. A gear shrieked. The river climbed the gate teeth. The high priest's rope snapped tight. It did not pull. It held, saint's hair against saint's hair, the way a vow remembers itself in two places at once. "Now," Cale said again, and I knew which door he meant. I went deeper and pressed my marked palm to the water, to the cold flanks of the bull's song, to the ugly geometry Tyvan had forced into a thing that is not supposed to be straight. I felt the temple plinth under my hand, the coin in Cale's fist, the well's breath, the altar's mouth, the black stone in its stolen collar, all the doors, all the levers, all of it wanted a verdict. "Be what you are," I told the bowl, the river, the rope, the men, the night. Something let go. Not the rope, not the bowl, not the river, Tyvan. You can feel it when a man loses his story. It has weight, it has sound. It is the softest, most dangerous thud in the world. He hauled, and the rope he held grew slack in his faith and heavy in his hands. The bowl's bands went from black to dull. The moon iron forgot its hymn. The door under the citadel yawned, not in threat. In relief. "Hold," Roran barked to his own men. And they did, which is why they lived. Kestrel moved, fast. Clever, cruel, ducking under a warden, letting a wolf's teeth find only cloak, slipping to Tyvan with the easy loyalty of a mercenary who knows where the last coin in the purse is. He cut the rope at Tyvan's feet not to free us. To sink the bargain entirely, the knife hit Saint's hair. It stopped. He blinked, delighted. He tried again. The edge slid off humility like rain off a blessing. "That's new," he said, almost admiring. And then Cale was on him. No roar, no theater, just movement that taught the rest of the body to agree. Kestrel slid aside with a laugh and flicked a palm full of pins toward Cale's eyes. Wolves hit him from the angle he had already written out of his plan. He went down under gray weight, still smiling like a man who isn't done being troublesome. Tyven took a step backward and found no purchase. Hard truth behind him, hard water in front. He looked at me standing in the river and saw, finally, what he had been refusing. A girl who had been built to be a lever and had learned to be a door. "Please," he said, and the word didn't belong to him. It looked borrowed from a better man. "Name your debt," I said, because we were all standing in front of a God that eats truth. He swallowed. He looked at the bowl, at the rope, at Cale's hand on Kestrel's throat. He couldn't do it. "It's all of them," he said. Instead, the coward's incantation, and tried to kick the cut end of the rope into the water. The high priest was quicker. She yanked the coil. Saint's hair bit his ankle like a mother's fingers. Tyven stumbled. Roran was there with simple, elegant efficiency. He did not strike. He tangled Tyven in the white rope and moved him with practiced tenderness to his knees. "You don't get levers," Cale told him, panting, a laugh in the ragged edge of it. "You get balance." We tied Tyven to the drum that had been meant to drown the city. The wardens took Kestrel's pins away from him like knives from a charming child, and bound him with worthy respect. He hummed, pleased to be wrapped so neatly in consequence. The rope at the gate groaned. The door under the river breathed the way men breathe when the doctor says the knife won't be necessary. The bowl's glow faded to the kind of black that is not absence but promise. I stepped back onto stone with my teeth chattering. For the first time all night, and only then let my legs remember we had been negotiating with winter. Cale's arm came around me as if it had been hoping for that job since birth. He smelled like iron and smoke, and a decision that had refused to be cocktail party clever. Heat moved between us, not mine to him, not his to me, between. The ledger line wrote that down too. "Done," Roran said, which is one of the good lies soldiers get to tell. He looked at Tyven, then at the bowl, then at the river. "What now?" "Now he confesses to the well," Kyle said, a weary generosity in it. "Or he learns that Saint's hair and water are both very patient." The high priest nodded once, clean as a bell. "We'll walk him," she said. "No wires, no chant. Just public wait. And him?" Roran tilted his head at Kestrel, whose grin suggested he had a second life sewn into the hem of the first. Kestrel shrugged as much as the rope allowed. "You can keep me," he said cheerfully. "But you'll get bored before I do." "Kennels," I said, before the room learned the wrong joke. "He'll clean teeth that can bite through his hand if he stops thinking long enough to deserve it." He lit up. "A promotion." Wolves rumbled, their idea of laughter, which sounds like the earth agreeing with itself. The wardens hauled him to his feet firmly. He bowed at me as if we were in a finer hall and went quietly, inventorying escape routes without apology. "Let him, doors are honest. They don't keep men. They keep choices." We carried the bowl back through streets that watched us from behind candles, and from on top of blankets, and from under hands that had not been sure who to pray to for a long time. The river found its old noise and seemed content to keep it. Snow melted off the iron teeth and didn't freeze again. Above us, the moon decided to stop wearing veils and showed her face without shame. In the market square, we stopped at the well. Tyven stood where Meroth had knelt, painful mirror. 2 men, 2 rooms, 1 lesson written with water and rope. People gathered as if the city were one body making a circle with its arms. The high priest did not stage anything. She held the rope, and by holding, told the truth about who owes what to whom. "Name it," Kyle said to Tyven. "Speak around it if you like. We've all had practice. The well won't take a word that floats." He tried, oh gods, he tried, to make it someone else's story. The council, the temple, the north, the rogues, the moon, hunger, fate. The well breathed and did not drink a drop. Finally he looked at me and found in my face not mercy, not triumph. Just the insistence of a door that had been walked through too many times to be impressed. I wanted to be the hand, he said. Not the throat beneath it. The well took it. No splash, no drama. Just a small satisfied pulling down. He watched himself sink and made the small sound men make when they realize their shape. Bind him to work, I said softly. Roads, latrines, stones heavy enough to make muscle remember math. Roran grinned with bone-deep relief. A merciful sentence, he said. It keeps him from thinking. The square's laugh loosened the night. We took the bowl back to the chamber under the citadel where it belonged. We set it on the altar's rim. It did not play coy. It hummed once, low and pleased, the sound a house makes when its door is hung true again. I put my palm in it, because I am a creature built to test what hurts if it might also heal. It warmed. Not mine. Ours. Balance, Ivan whispered, almost reverent. Instruments returned. There will be more levers, the high priest said, not unkindly. The city is full of clever carpenters. Then we'll keep building doors, Kale said, until levers feel foolish to hold. By dawn, the ledgers from the foundry were nailed to the council hall door where even drunk men could read the numbers for themselves. Tyvan's mark looked suddenly very small next to the sums. Maroth's rope at the well had not snapped. He had learned to drink by speaking enough truth to buy sips. Roran built a roster that respected hands instead of rings. The wardens stood posts at the floodworks and the foundry and the temple, not as wardens of men, but of math. The river breathed the way a healed thing breathes. We slept, eventually. No ceremony. We fell into it like soldiers into grass after a long march. When I woke, the light had discovered the window again, and the warmth under my ribs lay like a good dog in the doorway of my breath, one ear cocked, one eye. Kale sat at the edge of the bed with his boots on and his head in his hands in the posture of a man who has wrestled a god and woken with a headache. I touched his wrist. The bandage was clean. The burn was not gone. It had decided to be a scar instead. How many? I asked. 15 tied to Tyvan's ledgers, he said. 3 gone to ground. One charming archer cannot stop smiling at the idea of mending wolf pens. He'll be gone by spring, I said. He'll leave a note. Kyle agreed. And then, softer. We will have to be awake a lot. I like awake, I said. It's where doors live. He huffed, a piece of laughter that didn't need to be bigger to be true. They sang last night, he said. The wolves? The people. He looked out at the city, as if the rooftops might catch his words, and take them to the places he could not walk. It wasn't cheering. It wasn't prayer. It was belonging, I said, and felt the mark answer from my pulse like a bell. We went to the balcony because that's what you do when you need the horizon to be large enough to put a vow down and look at it. The air had the clean teeth of a new winter day. Smoke rose in ordinary columns from ordinary stoves. The temple door stood open. No wires hummed. The floodworks sat quiet, iron teeth at rest, gears oiled with new respect. You saved them, I said. We saved us, he said. It's more expensive and it lasts longer. Below, in the yard, the little boy Tyvan had held at the well chased a wolf pup with a laugh that had no idea yet what it owes. I cried, quiet the way snow melts under your sleeve and nobody has to notice, and when I wiped my face, my hand came away smelling not of ash, not of incense. Of water. What now? I asked, because endings are just starting lines learned to stand still. Now we build, Kale said. Roads, wards, laws you can see through. A city that knows how to hold its own weight without needing a throat under its hand. He paused. And when the next clever man finds a lever, we will not pretend to be surprised. We'll hand him a door, I said. And if he refuses it, we'll tie him to the well until he learns his own name, I finished. And the warmth wagged its metaphorical tail. That night, the city gathered without being told to. Not in the square with speeches. On roofs, on steps, on stoops. Candles appeared because hands like to be full when they're happy. The moon wore her whole face and didn't mind the fingerprints men have left on her name. I went to the highest balcony. Kale stood beside me, not above, not ahead. We didn't call. We didn't order. We breathed and let the breath be seen. One by one, wolves lifted their heads and sent a sound up the spine of the ridge. Not hunger, not warning, the other thing. The one packs make when they admit they are better together than they are alone. Below, Someone began a tune with no words. Then the high priest did something brave. She failed to lead. She stood in her doorway and listened, and didn't correct a single note. Roran leaned on a parapet and looked like a man who thought he didn't deserve to live this long and had decided to keep going anyway. Ivan slept on a bench with ink on his lips. Kestrel snored under two wolves who took their new job too seriously, and not seriously enough at once. I laid my palm on the wolf and moon at my wrist. It glowed, not big, just enough to see your hand by in a dark room. The ledger line inside me turned a page and found there was space to keep writing. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," Kale said. "We didn't promise no more storms." That would have been a lie and a poor one. We promised an open door, a counted breath, a city that doesn't drown its lessons, a river that forgets how to obey levers and remembers how to keep faith. The wind wrapped us like a very old friend and smelled, at last, of nothing you could buy and everything you could keep. The pack answered, city and wolves, priests and soldiers, children and widows, a king who had learned to be held to account, and a girl who had been taught to burn and chose, instead to balance. Thus ended the Lever's Law in Ashmore,